All right, so today we are going to briefly go over a few more things from last session on lexical definitions. Then we will push ahead to kinds of stipulative definitions. All right, while we're waiting for that to boot, how's it going? How's the reading going? Questions? How's the Logicola going? Yes, sir.
Reading, I'm still confused on the application of, I can't remember the exact terms, just the abbreviations, PR and LP.
Oh, pragmatism and
Yes,
logical positivism.
Yes, I'm still
Yes.
confused about how to apply those to arguments.
Okay. Yeah, they're not directly applied to arguments. They're applied to language and uses of language. And of course, proper uses of language are important for arguments. So this is one approach to uses of language. As the surprise ending will go, one of them is self-refuting. So, but we'll get there. We'll get there. That's the last 15 minutes of class today. Other thoughts, reactions, observations. All right, well, let's talk a little bit more about lexical definitions. Where did we leave off with lexical definitions? What was the last one we talked about? Was that the last one we talked about, God being the object of ultimate concern?
Yeah.
That sounds right. So here, let's just review quickly. The goal of good lexical definitions are dictionary definitions that are trying to track the way concepts are used in our culture, that concepts are used in our language. So it's important to get definitions that match the breadth and narrowness of the original concept. If your concept lets things in that don't belong to the original concept, that's too broad. If it excludes things that do belong to the original concept, that's too narrow. We want something that's not circular. Things that are circular fail to illumine the meaning of a word because they primarily reuse either the root word or keywords from the original concept. We want things that match the proper vagueness and precision of the original term. We want to match the tone of the original term. And we only want to include essential rather than non-essential aspects of the term. All right, so no, that's not it. All right, let's get you a session number. Nope. All right, so for the app today, session number will be 475252. That's 475252. 475252. 475252. All right. So what is the most serious problem? Remember, there can be more than one problem, but what is the most serious problem in trying to define metaphysics as any sleep-inducing subject? Metaphysics is any sleep-inducing subject. Good. Yeah, the most serious problem is that, yes, The most serious problem is that this is too broad. There are probably lots of things that are so boring they're sleep-inducing, not just metaphysics. So just so you know, the joke here is that even amongst philosophy, metaphysics is the driest, most abstract topic. I mean, there can be some very cool things in there, but you can only talk about the ground of being so much, the nature of substance and accident and essence. And even some of us find it to be sleep-inducing, as they say. But of course, there's probably other things that are equally boring. Advanced calculus, accounting, I don't know, pick your own thing. The Book of Leviticus, if you like religious literature that puts you to sleep. There's probably many things that are sleep-inducing. So it's definitely too broad. It doesn't really have the wrong tone. I don't really think it's vague. I mean, we all kind of know what metaphysics are. I mean, if you look it up if you study philosophy, you would know what metaphysics were. There's probably a way it might be too narrow. I don't think it's as big of a problem, but somebody might find metaphysics to be like really cool. Somebody who's even more into philosophy than I am. So, but yeah, I think too broad is the correct answer here. Good means of positive value. Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with sort of both these terms is they're both kind of vague. I mean, even good, unless you just don't realize that the term good can be used to analyze things on sort of many different nuances. The term good needs to be attached to a category of goodness. So, is Bill Gates good? Well, it depends on what category of goodness you're talking about. He's sure good at like creating cool computer stuff. Is he morally good? Maybe. I mean, he donates stuff. I mean, he's not like Mother Teresa. He's not like living in poverty for the sake of morality. But so again, goodness is always vague because it depends on what category you're referring to. Is ice cream good? Well, again, are we talking about good tasting or good for being healthy for my body? Definitely good tasting, not so good for being healthy. So good. Again, good is a vague term unless you add a sort of category, morally good or good for health or good aesthetically or a good sports player or something like that. Positive value is, again, these are both kind of vague terms. Not circular. We're not just saying good of good value. That's what circular would sound like. There's not really a shift in tone. Here's a weird one. Worst definition of human ever. Human being means featherless biped. I don't see any feathers in the room. Good, we're all humans. Yeah, most of you saw, there's probably other things that are both featherless and bipeds that aren't humans. What do you have in mind? What's an example of a non-human featherless biped? Oh, you didn't have anything in mind? You guys just clicking too broad out as a lucky guess? What's an example of something that's a featherless biped that's not a human? Okay, it's on 2 feet, moves on 2 feet. Okay, anything else? Yeah, you could, but I mean that's kind of cheating. I mean, they're the kind of creatures that naturally have feathers, is what that means. But there's other things like chimpanzees, certain kinds of monkeys walk on 2 feet. Um, all right, I know claim P means I believe claim P. What might be the most serious problem with that? Yeah, I mean, it does recycle a lot of the language from the first half, so that's one problem here. There's another thing too, though. Um, Knowledge is a stricter, smaller category than belief. In other words, I believe all sorts of things I don't know. I have an opinion about whether or not aliens exist. It's a belief, but I'm not stupid. I know I'm just guessing. It's not knowledge. I have beliefs that turn out to be false. I thought Andrew Luck of the Indianapolis Colts was going to be a once in a generation quarterback. He did not become a once in a generation quarterback. I believed it. I did not know it. It turned out not to be true. Sometimes the weatherman tells me it's going to snow or something's going to happen today, and I believe it, and it turns out not to happen. False predictions are beliefs that are not knowledge. So, yeah, not knowledge requires more than just belief. All right. I think that's enough about lexical definitions. Anything else about lexical definitions? Any other questions before we move on? Yes, sir. The next one, this one? Yeah, I know P means I believe P and P is true. Well, if you wanted to claim it's circular because it's kind of, copies some of the patterns from the first half, that's okay. This one I didn't. It's funny. This one's a hard one to talk about, so I was trying to get out of it. But you also wanted the answer, which is good for you. This goes to a debate in philosophy, and the debate in philosophy is this: is true belief enough for something to be knowledge, or do you need more than just something for to be a true belief in order for it to be knowledge? So the debate here that's being referenced is knowledge, does it equal true belief, or is it true belief plus something? And if knowledge is just true belief, then this actually would be a reasonably good definition, even if it's a little circular. But if it's true belief plus something, then then this category is still too broad for knowledge. And usually the answer in philosophy is indeed. To say that you know something, you need something that's a true belief, and you also need sort of a compelling justification for believing that belief. So, for example, a lucky guess isn't really knowledge, even if it turns out to be a belief that turns out to be true. I need a reason for believing it, something I could share with you. So let's take my aliens belief again. I don't believe aliens exist. At least not intelligent ones. Maybe there's algae out there somewhere, but I don't think there's little green men running around somewhere. So that's a true belief. For it to be knowledge, so let's stipulate that I'm right in that, and that's a true belief. To make it knowledge, I would also need sort of evidence that I could share with you. I could say, well, here is the way creatures work and necessary conditions for, sort of personal species to come into existence on a planet, and it just statistically is extraordinarily unlikely. It shouldn't happen anyway. So that would be the kind of thing that I would need to make my belief stipulate that it's true, and then I'd need a sort of evidence for it, compelling evidence. So good, insightful question. Did you have one, sir? Okay, too broad means the category lets things in that aren't in the original definition. Too narrow means that it excludes things that belong to the original definition. Too vague is that the relationship between these two things is so poorly defined that either because these words are vague or because there's sort of so many multiple things wrong with it, maybe it's too broad and too narrow at the same time. So that's another way of becoming too vague. If there seems to, so if the second term is just sort of doesn't have a clear relationship with the first term, that's definitely too vague. And also if it's kind of both simultaneously too broad and too narrow in kind of an obvious way. Good questions. Those are the questions that make me think you guys will do well on the next example. All right, let's push forward to stipulative definitions. All right, so far we had been talking about lexical definitions. Lexical definitions are dictionary definitions that track normal, common, accepted use of words within a particular culture, within a particular language. Stipulative definitions are different. Stipulative definitions are where you are not trying to use words in the normal way, but you are trying to stipulate a specific use either for sake of an experiment or for sake of clarity within your conversation or for sake of like an artificial language like logic. So I've given you some stipulative definitions in this class. Words like valid, argument, sound. Those definitions did not track normal usages of those words in our culture. When I explained the syllogistic use of the word some, I gave you a definition that does not track normal English usage of the word some. Remember, we said for the sake of logic, some meant at least one. Usually in English, that's not what it means. So those were stipulative definitions. Another example of a stipulative definition is I teach a movies class. So I sometimes joke, I have my definition of a good movie is a movie with at least 3 action scenes that can be analyzed on a deeper level and that makes Silverman laugh at least 3 times. That's what a good movie is, shockingly enough. Again, is that the way that the expression is usually used? Of course not. But that's how I might stipulate the definition. Stipulative definitions are really important in like science experiments. So you can't just have an experiment to say ask how many days do we have that are cold here in Newport News. Why? Well, because cold is a vague term. You need to stipulate a definition for cold, saying by cold we're going to mean every day where at noon it is less than 40 degrees. That will be a cold day. Or every day where the majority of CNU students wear jackets. Something like that would be a stipulative definition. One of the goals of most stipulative definitions is to clarify or narrow a definition. So I just gave you the example of clarifying or narrowing the definition of the word cold for the sake of some sort of experiment. So stipulative definitions seek to clarify or narrow definitions. All right, so some guidelines for well-designed stipulative definitions. We want clear terms that will be understood. So the more you can be specific and clear in your definitions, the better. You don't want to be vague. You don't want to use obtuse terms. You want to avoid circularity. Again, circularity is where you just reuse sort of root words or language from the original term or concept. The goal is to paraphrase the defined term and to show how you will use the term. And the goal is to aid the understanding of the subject. So if you're doing stipulant definitions properly, you are communicating more clearly, you're giving your reader, your listener, a better idea of the phenomenon that you're describing, examining, experimenting upon, and so forth. Yes, sir.
So would you say a stipulative definition is something that has has pre-assigned meaning to it already?
It has a meaning that we assign to it.
Yeah.
So it's pre-assigned in that sense. So again, there are lots of topics where the problem is nobody's really defined the term clearly enough for us to actually have a good conversation. So do we have a just society, a society that's defined by justice? Well, guess what? Justice is a vague term. You need to be more specific to have a good, helpful, productive conversation about that. Otherwise, one person will say, yes, it's a very just place because we are all equal under the law. And another person will say, absolutely not. We have complete inequality of outcome, therefore we're very unjust. And again, you need to know which definition you're talking about to have a sensible conversation. Same thing with, here, maybe you're not into justice. Here's a word many people are into. The word love. I love you. How do you know? Well, I want to spend my life with you. Wow, slow down, stalker. So that might be one person's definition. Another person might say, well, of course I love you. I want to date you all month. And then after that, well, then we'll see how we feel. Well, that might not meet your qualifications for love because the term is vague. And it's, I sometimes joke, here's the most dangerous conversation you can have. Especially this weekend, in honor of Valentine's Day. And the danger is just this. You need to make sure these words line up with the same concept. Because if one person is using one concept of love and the other person is using a different concept of love, bad things happen because something different will be communicated to each member of the conversation. So if one person says, I love you, and their idea of love is marriage, lifelong, monogamous commitment, pick out curtains, this sort of thing, kids running around the lawn. The other person's idea of love is it means that I'm willing to go away on a weekend trip with you and a fun bed and breakfast together, but nothing more. That's a recipe for bad things happen because they're using different concepts of love. All right, so definitions are important. All right, stopping points and definitions. Here's a fun thing about definitions. Definitions tend to be circular if you trace the concepts out far enough. So most dictionaries and most people won't define terms circularly in the immediate sense, but it'll be something like this. Term A means term B. Term B means term C. But term C means term A. So the conversation goes something like this. Justice means fairness, but fairness means equality And equality means justice. See the problem? I mean, especially the whole justice is fairness stuff. That's, if you don't know what justice is, I'm not sure fairness is a clearer term than justice. At least with equality, I think that's actually somewhat of a clearer term. But if if all you do is you define terms in these little circular patterns, you can get stuck, and it's not very helpful. You don't actually understand the conversation very well. Now, one trick is you can try giving examples of what you mean. So maybe tracing the conceptual map, the large conceptual circle, maybe we can learn something from that. But one way to add to that and to sort of avoid circularity is just give specific exemplifiers of what we have in mind, specific examples. So here, I write books about love. And here's a problem. Here's how your sort of large but circular definition of love might go if you map it out. Love, look it up. Maybe it means to care for others in an unselfish way. But to care for others in an unselfish way means to have a benevolent attitude. But benevolence means to be altruistic. And to be altruistic means to value others as ourselves. But to value others as ourselves means to love them. There we are, where we circle back on ourselves. Oops. What if we want to avoid that? Maybe we just try giving examples of what we mean. If we're talking about romantic love, we might mean, love, like Romeo and Juliet. Like if we can't be together, I will die. Yeah, that's the right reaction. Romeo and Juliet, that's not a great romance. That's very dysfunctional. But some people associate that with them. Or, maybe we mean something like selflessness, like Mother Teresa, or great social action like Martin Luther King or Gandhi or Jesus or whoever it is that you think is a great exemplar of love. Maybe you can use that as an example, and that's what the embodiment is, and not worry about this conceptual circle quite so much. All right, let's get to two strategies for stipulative definitions that show up in our culture, although I will show you one of them is deeply problematic. So here's one, a strategy that's very popular within science. It is called logical positivism. And the idea is terms ought to be defined in terms of observable tests that can be repeated. So verifiability and testability is at the heart of meaningfulness and proper definition. And if there is no way to test a statement, then that statement has no meaning. So the idea is to clarify our usages of words in terms of things that are verifiable and usually quantifiable. And if there's no way to do that, maybe there's no meaning to our words. Maybe our words are just nonsense. So here, let me give you an example. The concept of free will. Here's a disturbing thing. You may not have actual choice in the things that you do. And it's actually very difficult to prove in the bigger picture that your choices aren't caused by things outside of yourself in some sort of long causal chain of cause and effect. But there's no way to test this. So the question of whether or not you have free will is kind of moot. It's kind of a meaningless issue. And if you read the literature on the issue, it starts to go in circles very quickly. All right, so logical positivism is one approach to stipulative operational definitions. Here's another one, pragmatism, pragmatic definitions. And pragmatic definitions focus upon the practical differences the truth or falseness of a statement could make, and even believing that the statement is true or false. Now, these statements do not have to be testable, they just have to make a practical difference. Now let's go back to the example of free will. Free will might not be testable, but it actually turns out to make a huge difference in your life that you believe that your choices are not just an illusion and that they have consequences. What difference does it make to you that your choices are actually your own and free? It's not a rhetorical question. What difference does it make to you? How might life be different based on different answers to this question?
Suicide rates would be a lot higher
Right. Why?
because our choices mean nothing and therefore we mean nothing. So what's the point?
So good. One danger is this threatens to rob our choices of meaning in our lives by inference of all meaningfulness. Really, really bad. Ironically, suicide seems to be the ultimate example of someone trying to make a choice. But yeah, that's quite right. I mean, there's something at stake here. What else? What else? Well, if I didn't think I had free will, I might start trying a lot less hard, right? If my choices make no difference, if they're just an illusion, well, put my feet up and coast where I can. Often, believing your choices make a difference help your choices make a difference. And, whether you think in any sphere, whether you think, it's not going to make a difference, every potential romantic partner is going to reject you. Well, guess what? If you start believing that, you know what happens? People become much more likely to reject you because people who are unwilling to take chances, first of all, have less romantic opportunities because they take fewer chances, and they tend to be less attractive. Confidence, rumor has it, is attractive. So believing you have free will is actually very important. On the other hand, it also probably depends on what you think not having free will means. If it means all of the universe just depends on a butterfly flew right instead of left 50,000 years ago, therefore my life is doomed, that leads to sort of depression and suicide. If, however, I think, well, the universe is all ordered by an all-powerful God, and the good guys are going to win no matter what I do, that might make me really optimistic. Maybe naively so, but again, sometimes it depends on the larger metaphysical story that you tell yourself. All right, let's practice, and we're going to talk about the meaningfulness of several terms. So I want you to try to think like a logical positivist here. And the question is there a way of understanding these ideas in a way that is testable, verifiable, and repeatable? It's cold outside. Is there a way to understand this in a way that is meaningful in that it is testable, verifiable, and repeatable? Good, yeah. It's cold outside is meaningful as long as we take the time to define cold in terms of a specific temperature or specific action or something along those lines. Yes?
So when we read this, it's okay to kind of assume that, like, I think when I did this homework, I put non-meaningful because it wasn't like an exact temperature. You actually have like, oh, temperature relative to concern, like it could be 20 degrees or 20 degrees. Good. So your thinking is correct. We do need to define it a little more clearly, but it's meaningful as long as we set a point on what we mean for coldness. So I mean that's fine. In fact, that's an example of understanding what's going on a little too well. So that's a good. If you're going to get it wrong, I'm glad you got it wrong for that reason. So good. That clock is fast. Is that a meaningful claim or not a meaningful claim? Good. Yeah, that's a meaningful claim. I mean, we just have to define what it is that we're going to use to sort of set shared time. They have these atomic clocks set astronomically that they try to use to set time
at the top of the sort of structures that tell time. I just trust my phone, which probably isn't the smartest thing to do. But it's definitely meaningful because it's testable. What happens if that clock is fast and I start trusting it? Well, I'll start showing up at places too soon, and that is an empirical testable thing. If I keep showing up places 5 minutes before anyone else, that's a way of testing whether or not my clock is 5 minutes fast. Ooh, watch out for this one. Is it meaningful to say that there are 5-foot-long blue ants in your bedroom? Good. Yeah, this is an example. It's a claim that's meaningful. It's obviously false, but it's meaningful. What is the test for determining whether or not there are 5-foot-long blue ants in our bedroom? Well, we go to our bedroom and we use the superpower of sight. And if there are giant blue ants there, then it's true. And if there are not, then it's false. But what's important is that it's meaningful. Ooh, the great philosopher Aristotle claims that form is metaphysically prior to matter. According to logical positivism, is that going to be a meaningful claim or a not meaningful claim? Yeah, good. This is the kind of thing that logical positivists don't like. They think there's no way to test this. Because what's the test? I mean, do I take out like my metaphysics-ometer and like start like, shooting into things and trying to see, oh, this is like 6 angstroms more prior to than its form. I mean, this is in a certain kind of overly empirical thinking, this is just a kind of mental gymnastics. This is not the sort of thing that you can get measurements for and verify in a agreed upon way. Ooh, did you notice at noon all lengths, distances, and velocities doubled? Is it meaningful according to logical positivism if all lengths, distances, and velocities in the universe double? Yeah, actually, this one is not meaningful. And I think it's Gensler's idea of a joke. So imagine this room suddenly doubled in size, but we doubled in size. And in fact, it wasn't just this room and us, but everything in the universe doubled in size. Would you notice? You wouldn't even notice. There'd be no way to test it. Now, there is actually one other way to test it, speed and velocity. But if velocity doubles too, that's the other thing that you can use to measure things relative to each other. There'd be you wouldn't even notice if all lengths, distances, and velocities doubled. So this is not meaningful. I don't blame you for getting it wrong. I mean, it's kind of a trick question. Gensler's idea of a joke, I think. Ooh, I'm wearing an invisible hat that can't be perceived in any way. It's on top of my blue hat. Yeah, the can't be perceived in any way is the thing that makes this not meaningful for a logical positivist. Regina's toe hurts, but she shows no signs of it and will deny it. Poor Regina. Yeah, this again is the kind of thing they're talking about. If you deny pain and don't show any signs of it, there's no way to measure it. Ooh, watch out for this kind of thinking. Other humans have no thoughts or feelings, but only act as if they do. Make a good sci-fi movie based on an idea like this. You're the only one who's really real. Everyone else is just a kind of fake person. You can't. They're not really real. They have no thoughts or feelings. By the way, if you catch yourself thinking this way, get help, because that's the way you start thinking before you become a sociopath. Very dangerous way of thinking. Yeah, again, this is not meaningful because there's no way to test it. Manuel will continue to have conscious experiences after death. Lucky guy. Yeah, again, this is the sort of thing that positivists didn't like because there's no way to find out. There's no way to test it in a lab. Angels exist, thinking creatures that do not take up material space. By the way, this one's for free. There is an old medieval puzzle. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? In a Charlie Brown comic strip, one character suggested 3 if they're slender, but 2 if they're chubby. But the correct medieval answer is all of them. Why? Because angels do not take up material space. And of course, the positivists, this is the kind of thing they find to not be meaningful. God exists. Yes, this is the sort of thing that positivists did not find to be meaningful because you can't test it in a lab. All right, how about this? One ought to be logically consistent. Ooh. Yeah, so this is where we start to get into trouble with positivism. It turns out that this isn't meaningful. I mean, unless you start stipulating some very exaggerated test, or you need to stipulate a reason to be logically consistent. Maybe you ought to be logically consistent if you want your worldview to make sense. But there's nothing empirical that says that your worldview ought to make sense. So things like this turned out also not to be meaningful. Any claim whose truthfulness makes no practical difference is meaningless. Yeah, again, all these sort of foundational definitions, there's no ways to test that this ought to be the proper definition, so it's not meaningful. Yes?
So what would you do in like a conceptual way? What if you're trying to define a concept that wasn't material by itself?
Well, that turns out to be the prior. Answer this one, and then I'll answer your question. Any statement that isn't empirically testable is meaningless. Is that a meaningful claim or not a meaningful claim? So yeah, here's kind of the surprise ending for logical positivism. It fails its own test for meaningfulness. What happens is positivism is a good way to run a lab, but it is not a good way to conceptualize the starting rules for a lab or for reality. So, to answer your question, for non-material concepts, there turns out to be no way to test any of them, including starting definitions, including moral claims one morally ought to do. There's no way to answer that question if you limit yourself to the tools of logical positivism, which is why philosophers judge logical positivism to be sort of internally inconsistent and self-defeating. There are still some scientists that think this way. I mean, again, it's a good way to proceed within a lab, but you need to keep in mind that it only works within the lab. And there are facets to reality that just can't be sort of subject to laboratory testing. Does that help?
Yeah.
Good, good. Looks like we're out of time. We're going to come back and we're going to finish this up on Wednesday with pragmatism, because we'll see that pragmatism is a more flexible way of defining meaningfulness. Thank you very much. See you next time. Have a happy President's Day. Do something patriotic. Yeah. My kids have the day off. Happy day after Valentine's Day. Go buy some half-price chocolate. Yes.
This lecture reminded me of one of my favorite philosophy jokes.
Mm.
How do you disprove solipsism?
How do you disprove solipsism?
Take the guy who's saying it outside, shove a rock at his head. If he ducks, you disprove it.